Hello again, this is Justin Kelly from 3DB Labs, hoping to continue our series of videos on how to use our SCEPTRE software. So previously we went over how to open SCEPTRE, SCEPTRE's UI, how you can interface to it, and some of its features at a higher level. So then today we wanted to go over how to save a configuration, edit a configuration, how to save to disk data that you want, how to recall that data for offline analysis, and also how to configure the circular buffer. So if you'll remember from previously, we had mentioned that once a second, SCEPTRE is saving off your current configuration so that you can recall it if need be. So, and here's this right here. So I could just double click this and immediately go to what we were doing before, but I want to turn on the FIFO buffer going forward. So I edit this file. It takes me back to the first default screen that we had before, but this time, where previously I just clicked open, I'm gonna tick the DVR button, enable that, and then maybe increase this to 30 gigs and then click open. Okay. So we can kind of see here that I'm constantly writing to disk. And first thing I want to do is just show you how to save off a configuration. So if you want to save a configuration to be recalled later, up here at configuration, just tick that. Save. We'll just call this usurp test. Okay, so this should look very similar to what we were doing previously. So the first thing I wanted to bring up was the how to actually do a recording. So before I do that, though, I want to show you how to view any recordings that you've made so that you can actually spawn those for analysis during your current session, or if you're just opening SCEPTRE for the first time, how to look at those files there. So under recording database, here are all the files that I have in my recording database. And then for this tag, for this session, we'll call this usurp test as well. And then the last thing I also wanted to do was to bring up the recorders box. So sometimes it's a good idea to maybe push these things onto another workspace so that it's not clogging your real estate, but for the purpose of this demo, it makes sense to have it up. So you can change your default on how exactly you want the files to be saved. So that's fine. This is date, time, frequency, channel, and then the type. And then you can see here are all the options for what you can record. As you begin to spawn more software tuners, PDW creation, more things will populate here, but it will only populate what you can currently record. So this is the easiest way to record. I can just tick record here, and now it's saving to disk. Give me my name or the name of the file, and it's letting me know the write and how it's doing. You can tick that off, And now that's done, I can also tie different recordings together, so I can sync pre-D and FFTs. And if I tick one of them, I'm now recording both of them. You can also tick this drop-down button, give you some more options. You can do a timed recording. So if you want to say, record for 2 seconds, it's going to record for 2 seconds and then stop. You can also set, if you're not, this is more useful if you're not using the pre-D FIFO buffer, but you can actually configure it to have a small pre buffer if you don't have the room for a large circular buffer. So if I tick this, say 5 seconds, basically what's going to happen is every time I hit record, the actual start time of the recording is 5 seconds previous to that. So if you say, what was that? And you're racing up to hit the record button, you don't have to have too much of a heart attack because it has already been recorded as long as you click record within 5 seconds. Okay. So the other thing too, most of the displays have these buttons on the upper right hand side: RAW, pre-D, Spectrum, Audio, PDW, and you can also do your recordings from up there. So if you didn't have any of this up, you could just hit RAW and it's recording down there. Same way if you have things synced down here, if I tick RAW, it is actually recording both as well. If you just going to close this, and if you're looking at your recording database, you can also open these up. If I tick open, it will actually spawn a new instance of that. There you go. So it's that file recording back. Alternatively, if you tick these boxes, you have a number of different options that appear. So you can convert it and scale your output. You can do Little Indian, Big Indian. You can reformat it. So I take this reformat. By default, we typically save as a complex float, but you can convert that into whatever sort of data type you need. Oh, sorry, I misspoke. We typically save in complex integer. So you can select multiples of these and convert all of them at one time. And you can also export them as well. So this is a RAW file, and you can convert these into what's called a Midas Blue file, where you convert from Midas to RAW. You can rename them all within this GUI, and some other scaling things as well. Okay. So I'll keep this up just for a moment so I can show you the circular FIFO buffer. So if I go to input 1, because I'm DVRing it now, I have this DVR tab. If I just select the viewer, it will look very similar to the spectrogram. with the exception that this is the pre-D data. So I can take this, go back in time, select some data that I'm interested in, and I can play this out. So if I select play, just quickly add a workspace. That's actually that selection of data playing back for a replay. Alternatively, I can extract that. You can see it's saving to disk. So I've thinned and subband tuned out my FIFO buffer in order to grab a specific thing that I'm interested in. Over on the right hand side, you have the live button, which locks you to the most current minute. And one thing that is important is in order to represent, you'll notice I have if I switch back to the spectrogram, it looks a little different. It's scaled a little bit differently, and there's another bar missing here on the left-hand side. So to this area here, this grayed area actually is representing the currently viewed data with regard and scaling it with regard to how far I can go back in time. So if I tick this options, drag it over, you can see that for the 30 gigs I've set aside for FIFO storage, I get about 4 minutes and 37 seconds there. So this is 1 minute of that 4 minutes and 37 seconds. However, you will notice that now my axes do not align. So if I go back to my spectrum options for this, and if you ever get lost as to where your options are, if you've tagged them, just ticking this and ticking again will respawn them. So on the options menu, if I tab over to curves, I have axis alignment here, and I can select DVR to align those axes. The other thing I wanted to briefly go over was the auto enhancement button, or so what is when we say you're auto enhancing? So if I tick the zoom button and zoom in here, these FFTs were pre-calculated. And what I can do is because I had the pre-D sort of back here, or this is being drawn by the pre-D, I can just tick enhance. Now actually go back to the pre-D data and attempt to recalculate some better FFTs off of that. See, this looks a little ratty. Tick enhance. That's going to go back and recalculate FFT data for that. Alternatively, you can select auto enhance, which is an option that you can select as well when you're launching SCEPTRE. And now when I zoom in again, it's going to automatically enhance that data. The other thing I wanted to do as well is to show you how to bring up a previously saved config file. So if I just go ahead and save this configuration as USERP test, place that. Now if I close SCEPTRE, there's my usurp test. And if I double click it, I'm back to where I was. Now you'll notice there's a gap of data in here, but you should also realize that I just launched this session. So this gap in time represents the time that I had closed SCEPTRE and then brought it back, and I still have all that raw pre-D data going back. So I can go back again, still do an extraction, and write all that to disk. Okay, now let's briefly talk about how to load a file offline. We had discussed clicking this button and opening that up. I'll briefly show you how to do that from the GUI. So there are two main ways to do that. One is you click File, and there are two options to view a file, statically or as if it were real time. Real time is, as it sounds, it's going to play through that file, and you can play through that file either at the rate it was recorded or at a faster rate if you want to just view it as fast as possible. Or statically, and that will load the entire file into memory so that you can view it as if it were the DVR viewer and grab chunks of data that you're interested in. So you can either click Browse, and if you tick Browse, that's just going to do an OS browse. If you do Recordings, that is going to bring up the recording database. Here are all the files I looked at earlier. And if I just type, usurp test, that is going to filter out all the other files that I've recorded. And you can load multiple files simultaneously as well. The other way, if you're going to be opening multiple different files and you've recorded dozens of files, you just want to quickly sort through them, you can actually go directly to the Recording Database Manager. Which brings you to here. And you can obviously tick open on these. The other way to go about doing that is with the file switcher, just here, which is what I had actually meant to load a moment ago. And then that brings you to this display. So you've got Spectrum, DVR viewer, DVR Spectrum as well. And from here you can select whatever file that you're interested in. And there you go. So now it's playing back. I can zoom in and do my recordings on those. So that depending on what you're wanting to do, it isn't always best to have those playing back in real time. Sometimes you want them to be played back statically, which is why sometimes, although it is not as efficient, I do like to load them one file at a time. That way I get a nice display here as far as what the information is internally. I can override that metadata. The way that works is, depending on the file format, if we can parse the header, it will appear as this. If the header cannot be parsed, it will be whited out like this. And these will also be whited, or not whited out, they'll be accessible. And you can manually type in the specific information about that file. So you're not limited to just the format of the file that we record, which is open. You can definitely spec to that. And I click open now. Here is the static view of that data. And so just like before, I can zoom in. I can also go into the extraction mode, hone in on a specific little portion I want, and then play it back as if it were real. And now play back on a loop. And then you can do the various types of operations that you can do in SCEPTRE on that data playing back. Okay, so this has just been a brief overview of how to do recordings in SCEPTRE, how to load those recordings for offline analysis, and how to save a configuration, recall a configuration, and then to how to enable the DVR viewer.